Hey guys, tonight we're ending where all things begin, at dawn, or maybe it's the other way around. In the world of Hermes Trismegistus, you don't just wake up once in the morning. You wake up every time you realize you've been sleepwalking through your own life, which is most of the time. So before you tuck yourself into that blanket, sip your tea, and drift into a dream you'll forget by breakfast, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe, and maybe tap the bell so you'll know when it's time to wake up again. Not from sleep, from the big sleep, the one you didn't even know you were in. Now, picture this. You open your eyes in a quiet temple courtyard. The moon is fading, the air is cool, and somewhere nearby a man in a linen robe is telling you that tomorrow will be exactly the same as today, and that this is the greatest gift you'll ever get. No confetti, no fireworks, no cosmic drumroll. Just the same broom, the same bread, the same silence, and a slightly sharper you. It's not the kind of ending you get in movies. It's the kind of ending that turns around, shakes your hand, and says, "See you tomorrow." And tomorrow. And tomorrow. So take a deep breath. Exhale slowly, and imagine the first light of morning touching your face, the start of a brand new day that looks suspiciously like the one before. Which is exactly why it's worth paying attention. You are not in your bed. You are not in your time. You are not even entirely sure you are in your body. But the air is warm, the horizon is blushing gold, and the faint sound of chanting somewhere in the city tells you the day has begun without waiting for you. You blink yourself awake to find you're lying on a thin mat in a shadowed chamber, the smell of resin and ink still clinging to the air. No alarm clocks here. Your wake-up call is the sun itself. That smug golden overseer rising above the roofs of Alexandria, slipping between colonnades, spilling light through the open courtyard of the Temple of the Mind. This is where you've somehow found yourself. The house of Hermes Trismegistus, philosopher, mystic, and the kind of man who teaches the nature of the universe before breakfast. The room is bare, but not without purpose. To one side, a reed basket of scrolls leans lazily against a low shelf. On the other, a squat brazier glows faintly, its embers smelling faintly of frankincense and last night's conversation about eternity. The floor is cool stone beneath your bare feet, worn smooth by centuries of sandals shuffling from one mystery lesson to another. Somewhere nearby, you hear the deliberate sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, measured, the sound of a man who has nowhere to rush because time is his servant, not his master. And then he appears, not in a cloud of light or a theatrical gust of wind, but in the most disappointing, ordinary way possible, stepping through the doorway with a cup of something steaming in his hand. This is Hermes Trismegistus. Not a god, exactly, but not quite a man in the way you know men to be. His robe is linen, plain but finely made. His beard is neatly kept, his eyes amused but unreadable. He looks like someone who could tell you the meaning of life, but only after you've proven you won't fall asleep halfway through the explanation. "Up," he says, not unkindly, but without ceremony. The mind does not wait for the body. You stand because, frankly, what else can you do? Outside, the courtyard is waking. Young men in white tunics carry pitchers of water to wash the stone floors. A boy is arranging small copper bowls on a low table for the morning ritual. Above the wall, the sky is fully awake now, layered in pale amber and soft blue. Hermes takes his place in the center, one hand resting lightly on a staff tipped with two carved serpents twined in an eternal embrace. You've seen this image before, centuries later, in textbooks and on medical emblems. Here, it's not a symbol of health exactly, it's a diagram of reality. Before any lesson, there is a pause, not awkward, not empty. A silence that feels like it's listening to itself. Hermes closes his eyes, inhales the warm air, and lets it go. You almost do the same, as if following an invisible cue. And in that moment, the noise of the city, the gulls, the clatter of carts, the far-off hum of market chatter, seems to fade. The world narrows to the scent of incense and the slow, rising breath of the man in front of you. When he opens his eyes, they catch the light just enough to remind you why you're here. "We begin," he says simply. And somehow, without writing a single word or moving a single muscle, you feel like the teaching has already started. If you thought breakfast was going to be the first order of business, you have badly misunderstood the priorities of the house of Hermes Trismegistus. You will not be sinking your teeth into bread or figs just yet. Here, the morning begins with smoke, not the kind that makes your eyes water from a campfire, and not the kind that curls lazily from a scented candle in your apartment. This is incense, thick, resinous, ancient, the kind of smoke that feels older than language. It doesn't just fill the air, it drapes itself over the room like a living garment. An apprentice in a simple white tunic is already at work by the brazier, sprinkling pinches of powdered frankincense into the glowing coals. Each handful flares into a puff of silvery breath that twists upward as though it's in on the day's secrets. The smell is rich and sweet, almost too sweet, with a whisper of something sharp underneath. Myrrh, maybe, or the faint medicinal tang of desert herbs. You think about how, back home, you might light incense for ambience. Here, it's not ambience, it's a summons. Hermes steps forward, not hurried, not theatrical, simply present. He takes the long-handled bronze spoon from the apprentice and adds a measured pinch of something darker to the mix. A crumbly brown resin that sends up a different note entirely, deeper, rounder, as if the air itself is now carrying a bass note you can't quite hear, but can definitely feel in your ribs. He says nothing, but you understand this is the first lesson of the day. Nothing begins until the space itself is awake. And it's not just the air they're preparing, it's you. The scent clings to your skin, curls into your hair, seeps into your clothes. It's an unspoken contract. You will leave the dust and chatter of the outside world at the threshold, and when you walk into this space, you will breathe only the air of the sacred. The incense, you realize, is not to please the gods. It's to remind you that you've stepped into a place where the gods might be listening. Around you, the disciples stand quietly in a loose circle, hands clasped in front of them. No one coughs, no one fidgets, no one comments on the smoke tickling their noses. The discipline is palpable. These aren't monks hiding from the world. They are scholars, alchemists, seekers, each of them carrying a mind like a library and a patience like a desert stone. Hermes glances around the circle once, a slow sweep of his eyes that seems to take in more than your face. You get the distinct sense that he is reading you the way you might read a line of poetry, looking for what is not written there. The smoke thickens. Outside the courtyard, Alexandria hums and clatters to life. Sandals on stone, market vendors shouting, the squeak of wooden cartwheels. But here, inside the cool, shadowed cloister, time slows to a crawl. The sunlight filtering through the colonnade catches the smoke in suspended gold ribbons. Somewhere behind you, a pigeon coos softly in the rafters, as if even the birds understand they've flown into a library that speaks in silence. And then, finally, Hermes speaks. "We do not make the air sacred," he says, his voice even and low. "We remember that it already is." No flourish, no dramatic pause. Just that. You inhale the frankincense, the myrrh, the dust of whatever desert wind carried these resins here centuries ago, and for a moment, just a moment, you believe him. You've barely adjusted to the sweet heaviness of incense in your lungs when Hermes does the thing you've been dreading, or maybe hoping for. He looks directly at you, as if you're the only person in the courtyard, and asks the first question of the day. "What is the all?" That's it. No warm-up, no good morning, no easing you in with something manageable like, "How did you sleep?" Straight into the deep end of the cosmic pool. You're standing there barefoot, still thinking about how your stomach is empty, and suddenly you're supposed to define everything. The other students don't flinch. They've heard it before. Some close their eyes as though the question is a familiar melody. Others stare at the flagstones like the answer might be carved there if you just look long enough. Hermes waits, the way someone waits for fruit to ripen, not impatient but entirely certain it will happen in its own time. You open your mouth, and the only thing that comes out is a very confident, Hermes does not look disappointed. He actually smiles, faintly, like this is exactly the point. "Do you see," he says, "how quickly the mind reaches for something it has not yet touched?" You think about that. It's true. The moment he asked, your thoughts scrambled like startled birds, trying to grab onto words that would sound wise enough. And in that flurry, you realized something uncomfortable. You have no idea what you're talking about. He lets the silence stretch just long enough for the discomfort to settle in. Then he says, "The all is not what you think it is. It is what is thinking you." You blink. Your mind tries to loop back and pass the sentence, but it just slips through your mental fingers like water. Hermes notices the confusion and adds, "To know the all, you must stop looking for it. You must notice that it is already looking at you." Around you, heads nod. A few students smile the way people smile when they've been waiting for this part. You, on the other hand, feel like you've been handed a key to a door that just turned into a cloud. But maybe that's the point. The first question of the day isn't meant to be answered the way you'd answer a riddle. It's a lever, prying your mind away from its comfortable grooves. Hermes calls it loosening the thought knot. You call it utter mental chaos. Either way, it's working. Finally, Hermes raises his hand in a small final gesture. "Enough for now," he says, and begins walking toward the covered walkway where more scrolls wait. The students follow, silent. You trail behind, the question still echoing in your head, stubborn as incense smoke. And just like that, the day has truly begun. The scrolls are ready. The courtyard is quiet. You're about to follow Hermes into the shaded hall where the morning teaching will begin, but before you can cross the threshold, you're stopped by an apprentice. He gestures to a low stone basin filled with clear water. No words, no explanation. Just a nod toward the basin as if to say, "You know what to do." You don't. You look at the water. It's cool, faintly scented with crushed herbs and edged with little flecks of sunlight trembling through the colonnade. The apprentice dips his own hands in slowly, letting the water run over his fingers and palms, then shakes them dry before stepping aside. You mimic the motion, and immediately the coolness cuts through the warm morning air, a small shock to your skin. It feels oddly formal. Hermes appears in the doorway. He doesn't rush you, but his gaze flickers toward the basin, then back to you. "The hands," he says, "are the servants of the mind. If you wish to receive truth, you do not place it in soiled hands." You realize this is not about dirt. Not really. You washed your hands yesterday. Well, you think you did. But this is different. This is ritual, which means the gesture is about more than hygiene. The other students approach the basin one by one. Each moves with a quiet reverence, as though the water itself contains the lesson. You notice that none of them are in a hurry. The water is not just washing them. It's slowing them down, tugging their minds into a quieter place. Hermes steps forward and cups his hands in the basin. He holds the water for a moment before letting it fall back, the droplets catching the sunlight like a handful of tiny stars. "Purification," he says softly, "is not for the gods. It is for you. The infinite will speak to you only when your touch is gentle enough to hold it." You think about all the times you've rushed into something, a conversation, a thought, a decision, without pausing to prepare yourself for it. You think about how you treat knowledge like a grab-and-go snack, when maybe it's more like a delicate fabric that snags if you handle it carelessly. When it's your turn again, you dip your hands more deliberately. The water is cool, but somehow softer now. You rub your palms together slowly, imagining the thoughts you carried here, the stray worries, the stubborn doubts, rinsing away with the water. The apprentice takes the basin and carries it off. Hermes nods toward the doorway. "Now," he says, "we can begin." And this time, when you step inside, it feels like you actually mean it. The hall is cool, dim, and lined with shelves stacked high with scrolls bound in leather ties. Dust motes drift in shafts of light, moving lazily, as if even they have stopped to listen. The students take their places on low cushions in a semicircle, and Hermes settles onto a carved cedar seat at the centre. No one speaks. Not because they're afraid, but because it's understood. This is the hour when the air listens first. That's when you notice him, the student at the far left, younger than most, sharp-eyed, sitting just a little too comfortably. His posture says, "I've read all this before." His faint smirk says, "I could probably be teaching this myself." He doesn't fidget, he doesn't bow his head, he simply stares at Hermes as if he's waiting for the great sage to say something he hasn't already memorized. Hermes sees it. Of course he does. He doesn't confront the student directly. That would be too easy. Instead, he begins the morning's lesson in the slow, deliberate way of someone rearranging the furniture of your mind. He speaks of the principle of mentalism, all is mind, weaving the idea not as a declaration, but as a question that sits in the room like an unlit lamp. Nothing exists outside the thought of it, he says, and nothing is known until it is known through you. His voice is even, unhurried. But the young man's smirk grows almost imperceptibly, as though to say, "Yes, yes, I've heard this one." Hermes pauses mid-sentence. His eyes travel the room slowly, and then they settle on the young man. "Tell us then," he says. "What is the all?" The young man straightens. He quotes a phrase you're certain he's memorized from some commentary. Something about the divine unity of being, the eternal mind, the great oneness. It's eloquent, well-formed, and completely lifeless. Hermes lets the words hang in the air like incense smoke that refuses to rise. "Good," Hermes says softly. "Now tell me, when did you see it?" The young man blinks. "See it?" "Yes," Hermes says. "If you speak of the all, you must have met it. Where did it greet you? In dream? In stillness? In the way the morning air bends light across the courtyard?" Silence. The young man shifts in his seat. His certainty wobbles. The room watches. Hermes smiles faintly. It is easy to know what the wise have said, harder to know what they meant. Knowledge without sight is like a coin without weight. It looks real until you try to spend it. The smirk is gone now. The young man lowers his gaze. Hermes turns back to the room. "Let us begin again," he says. "But this time, let us begin with seeing." And you realize this was the lesson all along. The hall is ready, cushions arranged, scrolls waiting, sunlight lying in thin golden bars across the floor. The apprentices sit cross-legged in patient rows, the smell of the morning incense still clinging to the air like a memory. Hermes stands at the center, hands folded loosely in front of him, eyes half-lidded, as though he's listening to something the rest of you can't quite hear. No one speaks. Not because they've been told not to, but because the weight of the silence has settled over the room like a heavy cloak. It's not awkward, not tense, just deliberate. A silence you can feel in your bones. You shift on your cushion, unsure if you should clear your throat, and then quickly realize you'd rather choke than break the spell. Hermes lets it stretch. A minute, two. The kind of pause that feels like it's been carved out of time itself. The air is still, except for the faint scratch of a quill somewhere in a side chamber, perhaps a scribe preparing the day's copies. You begin to notice things you normally wouldn't. The coolness of the stone beneath your legs, the faint crack in one of the cedar pillars, the way the sunlight refracts differently as it passes through the curls of incense. It's as though the silence has pulled your attention into sharper focus, stripping away the mental chatter you didn't even know you were carrying. Finally, Hermes speaks, not loudly, but with a voice that feels like it belongs to the silence rather than interrupting it. "Every word you speak is a stone thrown into still water. Watch what ripples you make." He steps slowly in front of the first row of students. "We speak too quickly," he says, "because we fear being unheard. But if your words are born from silence, they will carry their own echo." He stops beside you for just a moment, his gaze resting briefly on your face before moving on. "Before you answer a question, you must hear the question. Before you teach, you must listen. Before you say anything at all." He opens his hands, as if presenting the silence itself. "You must begin here." The apprentices nod. No one rushes to respond. Even those who might normally have something clever to say keep their tongues still. You begin to understand this isn't just a dramatic pause before a lecture. This is the first teaching of the day. The silence is the teacher. Hermes is only the translator. When the quiet has ripened to a perfect stillness, Hermes turns toward the scroll table. "Now," he says gently, let us see what the words have been waiting for. And just like that, the lesson begins, not with a sound, but with the memory of everything that wasn't said. You thought the next stage of the day would be some grand ceremony, or perhaps the unveiling of a secret scroll that explains the cosmos. Instead, Hermes hands you a broom. It's not even a glamorous broom, just a bundle of stiff reeds bound with cord, its handle smooth from decades of hands that have done this work before you. An apprentice points to a section of the hall where sunlight pours in across the floor, revealing a galaxy of fine dust motes. "There," he says simply. You hesitate. Surely the scribe of the gods does not require his students to sweep. But Hermes is already sweeping his own section of the courtyard, his movements slow, deliberate, without the slightest sign that this is beneath him. In fact, there's an odd dignity in the way he does it, as if each stroke of the broom is as important as any teaching. The reeds hiss softly against the stone. You watch how the dust lifts, swirls, and settles again in the sunlight, like miniature clouds forming and dissolving in seconds. It's strange. This isn't just cleaning. It's like the broom is drawing invisible lines across the floor, erasing the scattered footprints of the morning and resetting the space to zero. Hermes glances up. "You think this is about dust?" he says, reading your thoughts without needing to. "The dust is just the excuse. The floor will always be dusty again tomorrow. It's you who must be swept clean." You work more slowly now. The broom feels different in your hands, less like a tool, more like an instrument. Each sweep makes the space brighter, calmer, sharper. You begin to see how this could be part of the teaching, an act so humble it hides its depth until you've been doing it for a while. Another apprentice, kneeling nearby with a cloth, polishes a brass oil lamp. "If the room is clouded," he says quietly, "the mind will be clouded. And if the mind is clouded, you will never see clearly, even in daylight." His voice is low, but the words lodge somewhere deep. By the time your section of the floor is clean, the sunlight looks warmer, the air lighter. You straighten up, feeling a small satisfaction. Not the triumphant kind, but the quiet satisfaction of knowing you've done something that doesn't need applause. Hermes leans his broom against the wall. "A clean space is a clear mirror," he says, "and the truth does not appear in a fogged one." He walks toward the inner hall where the next part of the day waits. And as you follow, you can't help but glance back at the sunlight on the swept floor. Somehow, it looks like it's watching you too. The floor is clean. The air still smells faintly of incense. The morning light has shifted, now angling low enough to slip between the columns and warm the edges of the hall. You expect Hermes to call for the next teaching, perhaps the unrolling of some precious scroll. Instead, an apprentice appears with a small clay tray, holding a battered copper kettle, a stack of simple cups, and a bundle of fragrant herbs tied with string. Tea. Not the spiced, perfumed kind you've tasted before, but a quiet, grassy smell with a hint of something bitter hiding in it. The apprentice sets the tray on a low table in the centre of the room, and without a word begins to pour. Steam curls upward, ghost-like, dissolving into the air before it reaches the ceiling. Hermes takes the first cup, not as a master claiming privilege, but as if to test the warmth, the scent, the moment. He sits cross-legged, holding it in both hands, eyes resting on the surface as if it might speak. No one drinks yet. The kettle continues to pour. The steam continues to drift. You begin to realize this is not about tea. When every cup is filled, an apprentice places one before you. It's warm against your palms, heavier than you expect. You can smell the sharp green bite of the herbs, the faint trace of clay from the cup itself. You raise it to your lips, but no one else moves. Hermes hasn't moved, and so you wait. Finally, Hermes lifts his cup and takes the smallest sip. Only then does the room follow. The tea is strange, earthy, slightly bitter, with a sweetness that only appears after you've swallowed. You take another sip, slower this time. Around you the room is utterly still, no clinking cups, no slurps. Just the sound of quiet breathing and the occasional soft pop from the brazier in the corner. Hermes sets his cup down gently. "To drink without tasting," he says, "is to live without noticing." and to notice only the taste is to miss the drink entirely. Both are blindness. You look at the cup again, the warmth in your hands, the steam against your face, the way the bitterness fades into a whisper of sweetness. You realize the tea is not the point. The tea is the permission to simply be here, in this room, doing nothing but being aware of the cup in your hands. When the last drops are gone, the cups are gathered silently. No thanks are spoken. The act itself is the thanks. Hermes rises and moves toward the shaded walkway. The tea is finished, he says softly, but the silence stays. And it does. It follows you out of the hall as if it's clinging to your robe, determined not to let go. You were expecting the next stage of the day to involve scrolls, diagrams, maybe a cryptic riddle about the nature of the soul. Instead, you're standing in the kitchen courtyard, staring at a clay bin the size of a sarcophagus, filled to the brim with raw rice. Beside it sits a broad wooden tray, and beside that stands an older apprentice holding a flat wicker fan. He points to the bin and says, "Separate it." You laugh because surely he's joking. He is not. The rice is clean enough at first glance, but closer inspection reveals tiny stones, bits of husk, stray grains of barley, and the occasional unidentifiable speck from some far-off storage house. The task is simple but endless. Reach in, grab a handful, spread it on the tray, and pick through it, grain by grain. The older apprentice demonstrates with the speed of someone who's been doing this since before you could walk. You try to imitate him, but your hands move like you're wearing mittens. Hermes appears in the doorway, watching without interrupting. After a moment, he strolls over and sits beside you. He takes a handful of rice and begins sorting with maddening calm. "The mind," he says, "is exactly like this bin. Most of it is pure, some of it is husk, some of it is stone. But you will not know which is which until you touch every grain yourself." You glance down at your pile. You've separated maybe a dozen grains while he's already cleared a small mound with elegant precision. "And if I just leave the stones?" you ask, only half joking. "Then you break your teeth when you try to eat," Hermes says, not looking up. And so it is with thought. Leave the stones in and they will break you when you try to live. You work more carefully now. Your fingertips begin to learn the subtle difference between the smooth oval of rice and the hard, cold weight of stone. Time slides by unnoticed. The sound of rice grains trickling across the tray becomes a kind of soft rain. Your mind, which at first was impatient and restless, begins to settle into the rhythm. When the tray is finally clean, the older apprentice carries it away to be cooked. Hermes brushes the last fleck from his palm and rises. "Sorting the rice will not make you wise," he says, "but it will make you ready for wisdom, and that is harder." You stand, stretching your legs. The courtyard smells faintly of smoke and grain. You look at the massive bin still brimming with rice and realize you've barely made a dent. But somehow, that doesn't bother you anymore. Hermes is already walking toward the garden. "Come," he says over his shoulder. "The mind is ready. Let's see what the hands can learn next." The garden is not what you expect. You imagined something lush and ornamental, a perfumed Eden hidden in the folds of the temple. Instead, it's a modest square of earth bordered by low stone walls, with rows of herbs, figs, and vegetables growing in patient, orderly lines. A few olive trees stand at the edges, their silver leaves catching the late morning light like tiny mirrors. The air smells faintly of thyme, warm soil, and water that's been sitting in a clay jar since sunrise. Hermes is already there, kneeling in the dirt with his robe hitched up around his knees, a small bronze trowel in one hand. He works without hurry, loosening the soil around the roots of a young plant. The other students are scattered through the garden, some weeding, others watering, one trimming the dead leaves from a basil plant. An apprentice hands you a wicker basket and points to a patch of green near the wall. "Pull the weeds," he says. That's it. No deeper instruction, no whispered hint about hidden symbolism. Just pull weeds. At first it's mechanical. Bend, tug, toss, bend, tug, toss. You try to be efficient, clearing as many as you can without tearing up the good plants. But after a while, you start to notice how stubborn some of the weeds are, clinging to the soil with a grip that feels almost personal. Others slide free with barely any resistance. You start to feel the difference between a weed that's just appeared and one that's been quietly taking root for weeks. Hermes moves beside you, glancing at your progress. The mind grows weeds too, he says, brushing soil from his hands. Old habits, old lies you've told yourself. They root themselves deep and drink the same water as your truth. He pulls a thick-stemmed weed from the earth with one steady tug, holding it up so the roots dangle in the sunlight. If you only cut it at the surface, it will grow back. You must take it out whole. The metaphor is obvious, but it lands differently when you're sweating over the soil. You find yourself tugging slower, feeling for the roots, coaxing them out rather than yanking. It takes longer, but it's cleaner, more final. By the time your section is clear, your hands are stained with earth, your knees ache, and your basket is half full of uprooted weeds. The garden looks subtly different now. More open, more breathing space between the plants. Hermes wipes his hands on his robe and surveys the space. A garden without weeds is not perfection, he says. It's simply a garden that is paying attention. He nods toward the olive trees, their leaves whispering in the light breeze. The same is true for you. You stand there a moment longer, feeling the sun on your back and the soil under your nails. Somehow, the quiet here feels richer than before. Then Hermes turns toward the cloister. Enough for the earth, he says. Now we work on the fire. You might think the philosopher who whispers to the gods has better things to do than wrestle with a pile of dirty robes. You would be wrong. In the temple courtyard, a long wooden trough has been filled with water drawn from the cistern, its surface rippling with the scent of crushed soapwort leaves. The apprentices stand around it, sleeves rolled up, each working a robe against a smooth river stone placed inside the trough. You're handed a bundle, heavy, damp, and carrying the faint smell of sweat, incense, and sun-baked dust. This is your robe from yesterday, and possibly the day before. You kneel by the trough and plunge it into the water. Immediately, your hands go numb. The water may have been sitting in the sun all morning, but somehow it feels like it's been drawn straight from a glacier. The others work methodically, scrubbing the cloth in circular motions against the stone. You mimic them, but your strokes are clumsy at first, splashing more water onto yourself than onto the robe. Hermes appears, not participating, but watching from a shaded corner with the faintest trace of amusement. Cleanliness, he says, is a mirror of discipline. You may endure the dust of the road, but you do not wear it as part of yourself. He kneels beside you, takes the robe from your hands, and begins to scrub it in a way that's almost musical. Steady, rhythmic, efficient. The fibers loosen, the water clouds, the cloth lightens in colour before your eyes. Everything you touch, Hermes continues, will take something from you, your time, your thought, your care. A robe, a friend, a scroll, a day. If you wish them to remain clear, you must return to them again and again to clean away what has settled unseen. You return to your own robe, working more deliberately now. The cold no longer shocks you, it wakes you. Each stroke against the stone feels less like labour and more like a conversation between your hands and the fabric. Eventually, the water runs clearer, the cloth softens, and you feel a quiet satisfaction that has nothing to do with philosophy and everything to do with simply finishing something well. The robes are wrung out, twisted until the water drips away in slow silver rivulets. They're carried to a line strung between two olive trees, where they hang like pale sails catching the afternoon breeze. The sight is unexpectedly beautiful. These humble garments, swaying gently, each one lighter now than it was an hour ago. Hermes glances at the row of drying robes, then at you. If you can keep your robe clean, he says, you can keep your mind clear, and if you cannot... He lets the sentence hang, the unspoken end obvious. You follow his gaze back to the laundry line. The wind catches one robe and lifts it, just slightly, as if testing whether it's ready to fly. The robes are still swaying on the line when Hermes signals for the midday walk. The apprentices gather at the gate, each carrying a small, empty clay bowl. No scrolls, no tools, no hidden pouches of coins, just these bowls. The city awaits beyond the temple walls, and you have been told nothing except, walk with us. The streets of Alexandria are alive. Vendors shout their wares over the bleating of goats and the clatter of cartwheels. The air is thick with the smell of baked bread, grilled fish, and the faint tang of the sea. The apprentices weave through the crowd with quiet purpose, robes brushing against merchants' stalls. Occasionally, someone steps forward, a fishmonger, a potter's wife, a boy balancing a tray of dates, and places something in one of the bowls, a figel mesteto, a piece of bread, a handful of olives. You realize you are begging, but it doesn't feel like begging. There are no outstretched hands, no pleading eyes. The apprentices do not even speak, except to bow their heads in thanks. The people give not from pity, but as if fulfilling a pact older than memory. Hermes walks at the centre of the group, his own bowl cradled lightly in his palms. His eyes meet those of each giver with the same calm gravity he offers students in the temple. No smile, no nod of approval, just an acknowledgement that this too is part of the teaching. When someone offers you a plum, your first instinct is to refuse. You don't need it, and you're not sure you've earned it. But Hermes's voice echoes behind you. To give is a gift. To receive is also a gift. Deny either, and you break the circle. You take the plum, bowing your head. The giver's smile feels unexpectedly warm. The bowls slowly fill. Bread, fruit, small coins, a sprig of mint. It's a patchwork meal gathered from a dozen different hands, each piece carrying the invisible weight of someone else's generosity. You start to understand, this isn't about food. It's about being part of a web of exchange where status doesn't matter, where giving and receiving are both acts of trust. By the time you return to the temple gates, the city noise fades into the rustle of the olive trees. The apprentices sit in a circle on the courtyard stones, emptying their bowls into the centre. No one keeps what they were given. Everything is shared. The bread is torn into equal pieces, the fruit passed from hand to hand until nothing remains in the centre but a few crumbs. Hermes takes one of the last pieces of bread and places it in your hand. When you learn to receive without pride, he says, you are ready to give without measure. You bite into the bread. It's coarse, a little dry, but it carries the taste of something deeper than hunger. And as you chew, you notice, for the first time today, you are full. The shared meal is over, the bowls washed and set aside. The courtyard is quieter now, the afternoon sun pooling in warm gold across the flagstones. Hermes does not speak. He simply rises, gestures toward the shaded inner hall, and the apprentices follow without a word. You do the same, carried along in their wake. Inside, the air is cooler, dim. Thin lines of sunlight slip through high windows, catching the faint smoke of the morning's incense still lingering in the rafters. Cushions are arranged in a circle. Hermes takes his place at the centre, not on a higher seat, but on the same level as everyone else. No one asks questions. They know what is coming, the second meditation of the day. You sit cross-legged, shifting to find a balance between comfort and stillness. The stone floor beneath the thin cushion is unyielding, but somehow it feels grounding, as if your weight belongs here. Hermes closes his eyes. The apprentices do the same. You follow suit. The silence is immediate and vast. It's not the soft, drifting quiet of the early morning. This is denser, heavier, like standing waist-deep in still water. You hear your breath. You hear your heartbeat. You even hear the faint ticking of something inside your own mind, like an ancient clock you didn't know was there. Thoughts arrive, uninvited, a snatch of memory, a flash of yesterday's conversation, an itch on your cheek that now feels like an emergency. The impulse is to swat them away, but Hermes's earlier words drift back to you. Do not fight the current. Let the river carry you until it shows you its bed. So you let the thoughts come. You let them go. They swirl and fade like smoke from the brazier dissolving into the rafters. Time becomes strange. You don't know if it has been 5 minutes or 50. The silence deepens until it feels alive, as though the room itself is breathing with you. And in that breathing, there is a subtle shift. Not dramatic, not earth-shattering, but real. The chatter in your head begins to thin. The stillness begins to spread. Somewhere in the distance, a pigeon coos. A door creaks faintly. You notice these sounds, but they don't pull you away. They're part of it now, threads in the same tapestry. Then, as quietly as it began, Hermes opens his eyes. No bell, no chant, no signal, just the simple act of returning. One by one, the apprentices follow, their gazes steady but softer now, as if they've been rinsed clean. Hermes rises without a word and walks toward the door, sunlight spilling across his robe. The apprentices stand. You follow. No one asks what happened in that stillness, because no one needs to. Outside, the world feels the same, and yet, in some private corner of your mind, you know it isn't. The second meditation dissolves like mist, but Hermes doesn't let the stillness fade into idleness. Instead, he steps into the sunlit courtyard, his pace unhurried, his steps deliberate. The apprentices fall into place behind him, forming a loose line that begins to trace slow, careful circles along the outer walkway. At first glance, it looks like nothing, a casual stroll through the temple grounds. But after a few turns, you begin to notice. Every footfall is placed with exact precision. The heel touches the stone as if greeting it. The ball of the foot lowers without haste. The toes spread into their space like roots testing the earth. You try to copy it. Your first steps feel exaggerated, awkward, like you're parodying the motion. But the rhythm settles in quicker than you expect. Your body starts to match the cadence of Hermes. Not rushed, not lagging, just moving. The sound is part of the lesson. The soft shuffle of sandals, the faint brush of robes against legs, the quiet echo of steps meeting stone. In the background, the city hums beyond the walls. Carts creak, vendors call, gulls cry overhead. All of it folds into the same measured beat. Hermes speaks without turning. Most walk to arrive, few walk to be here. He lets the words float in the air like the scent of the garden herbs still clinging to your sleeves. When you walk only to reach the end, you've missed the road entirely. The line of students rounds another corner. Sunlight flashes on the pale stone. You notice how the shadows shift with each step, each breath. The same path looks different depending on how you're looking. You begin to feel a small expansion inside yourself, not dramatic, but like the quiet widening of a window. You're not thinking about where you'll be in a minute or what comes after this. You're only here, tracing the worn stones, following the soft rhythm of feet and breath. Hermes slows, stopping beneath the shade of an olive tree. The apprentices gather loosely around him. The ground you walk on now, he says, is the same ground you have always walked. Only your mind decides whether you have ever truly touched it. The words land quietly, without a push. You feel them more than you understand them. Hermes turns, continuing down the path toward the inner hall. No one rushes to follow. Not out of hesitation, but because the act of moving has shifted into something you don't want to hurry. By the time you step back into the shaded colonnade, it's clear this wasn't just walking. It was seeing the road under your feet for the first time. The walk slows to a halt in a shaded alcove where the air feels cooler and smells faintly of mint from the garden nearby. Hermes gestures for everyone to sit. Cushions are brought, but a few students simply fold themselves to the stone floor as if the ground itself were enough. The sun has slipped behind the temple walls now, leaving the space in a soft, amber half-light. Hermes does not speak right away. He stands at the center of the circle, one hand lightly on his staff, the other resting loosely at his side. When he does speak, it is almost a whisper. If the breath is shallow, the mind will be shallow. If the breath is lost, so is the mind. He lowers himself onto a cushion and closes his eyes. Inhale, he says, not as if you are taking air, but as if you are accepting a gift. You follow, breathing in slowly, feeling the cool air curl into your chest. Now exhale, not as if you are pushing something away, but as if you are offering it back. The rhythm begins to form: gift, offering, gift, offering. Your thoughts try to intrude: a flicker of memory, the sound of a bird overhead, the faint creak of the wooden beam above you, but the breath keeps pulling you back, folding each distraction into its rise and fall. Hermes' voice drifts in again. The breath you draw now is not yours. It was carried to you by the world. It will leave you the same way. Between its coming and going is the space where life is given. You begin to notice the small pauses, the brief, weightless moment at the top of the inhale, the soft emptiness at the bottom of the exhale. These spaces feel different from the breath itself, as if they're little windows where something unseen peeks through. Time loosens. You can't tell if you've been here for minutes or hours. The sound of everyone breathing together fills the space like a quiet tide, rising and falling in perfect unison. Finally, Hermes opens his eyes. A man who does not know his own breath cannot know his own mind, he says, and a man who does not know his mind cannot know the all. He places his hands on his knees, palms open as if holding something invisible. The secret is simple. The breath is always here. You are only asked to remember it. The group slowly stands, no one rushing, as though movement should not disturb what's been built in this stillness. Hermes walks toward the sunlit edge of the courtyard, the last rays of afternoon spilling around him like gold, and as you follow, your own breath feels like it's walking beside you, patient, loyal, and suddenly impossible to ignore. The breath has settled into you like an old friend when Hermes changes the current. Without warning, he picks up a small, worn wooden tablet from beside his cushion and holds it in the crook of his arm. Its surface is carved with flowing script, not the formal hieroglyphs of the temple walls, but a looping, personal hand, as if meant to be read only by those who will carry it in their bones. Today, Hermes says, we speak the river into motion. He begins with a single phrase, low and deliberate. The syllables are strange on your ears, their rhythm both sharp and rolling, like pebbles tumbling in water. The apprentices repeat after him, voices merging into one unbroken thread. You follow along, your tongue stumbling at first over the unfamiliar cadence. The phrase repeats, again and again. Somewhere between the 10th and 20th repetition, the words stop feeling like words. They lose their edges, melting into pure sound. You no longer say the mantra, it says itself through you. Hermes walks slowly around the circle, his voice unchanging, as if pulled along by some current older than thought. The mind thinks it can hold, he says between repetitions, but the current of the mantra does the holding. Let it carry you. You keep speaking. The sound vibrates in your throat, spreads into your chest, hums in your bones. After a while, you can't tell whether the voices in the room are coming from outside you or from somewhere deep within. The air feels heavier, as if thickened by sound. Somewhere in the blur, you notice how the repetition blunts the restless edges of your mind. The stray thoughts that usually nip at your focus are gone. The mantra fills the space they would have occupied, leaving no room for anything else. It's like flooding a cracked vessel until the leaks don't matter anymore. Hermes stops walking. He sits again in the center of the circle and lets the final repetition stretch into silence. The absence of sound is almost startling, the way a riverbank feels when the tide suddenly pulls away. He looks around the circle, his eyes lingering on each face. A single word, held well, can move more than 1,000 thoughts. But if you speak without knowing the weight of what you carry, your voice is only wind. The apprentices bow their heads. You sit with the echo of the mantra still humming in your chest, wondering if it will fade, or if you'll carry it into your dreams tonight. Hermes rises and moves toward the far colonnade, where the shadows have grown long and cool. Enough speaking for now, he says. The wall is waiting. You follow, not yet knowing what that means, but certain you will. You expect the wall to be metaphorical. It is not. Hermes leads you into a narrow chamber at the edge of the temple, where the air is cooler and dimmer than the courtyard. The room is bare except for a low bench running along one wall and a section of plastered stone opposite, smoothed to an almost unnatural flatness. It's just a wall, pale, plain, and stubbornly unremarkable. The apprentices take their seats without hesitation, each facing the wall as if it were an honoured guest. Hermes sits last, his robe folding neatly around him. "There is nothing to see," he says. "That is why you must look." So you look. At first, it's absurd. Your eyes search for patterns, cracks, anything to justify staring. The plaster has faint swirls from the mason's hand. The colour is not pure white, but layered, cream, ochre, and a hint of grey in the shadows. You notice a small imperfection near the bottom, like a faint bruise in the stone. These details keep you busy for the first few minutes. Then they lose their novelty. The wall becomes the wall again, unmoving, unchanged. Your mind starts to wander. You think about lunch, about the rice sorting, about whether your knees will go numb if you sit here too long. You want to look away, but Hermes's calm presence anchors you. "Let the wall be the mirror," he says softly. "When you see only it, you will see yourself." The words sink in. You keep looking. Slowly, the chatter in your head starts to match the stillness in front of you. The urge to fidget fades. Time begins to blur. Minutes melt into something softer, less measurable. The wall is no longer blank. It isn't that images appear. It's that the space between you and it begins to dissolve. You can feel its presence as much as you can see it, like it's leaning back toward you, curious about the one who's been staring for so long. A small shift happens in your chest. The quiet is deeper now, not the fragile kind that can be broken, but the steady kind that holds. You understand, this isn't about walls. It's about standing still in front of what is without demanding it change for you. Hermes speaks again, his voice barely above a whisper. "The world will always move to catch your eye. The wall will not. That is why it teaches." He stands, breaking the spell without shattering it. The apprentices rise, some slowly unfolding stiff legs, others still lost in the space they've been staring into. You follow Hermes back toward the courtyard. The sunlight feels brighter, louder, even warmer than before, and though you've been looking at a wall for what felt like forever, you find yourself already missing it. Like an old friend you didn't know you had until you said goodbye. You return to the courtyard, still carrying the strange stillness from the wall. The apprentices settle around the perimeter, while Hermes walks to a small wooden frame near the olive trees. Suspended from it is a bronze bell, unadorned but beautiful in its simplicity. A slender mallet hangs beside it on a leather cord. Hermes stands before the bell for a long moment, his hand hovering over the mallet but not touching it. The apprentices watch without expectation. You wait for some signal, a ritual, an instruction. Instead, Hermes simply lifts the mallet and strikes the bell once. The sound blooms into the air, deep, clear, and impossibly round. It hums through the courtyard walls, up the columns, across the tiled roof. The note lingers like a low sunbeam, fading so slowly you can't tell the exact moment it disappears. He strikes it again. The second note doesn't erase the first. It joins it, weaving into the memory of the sound that came before. The air feels thicker now, as if the vibrations have weight. "Every bell is a question," Hermes says finally. "Not every question needs an answer." He strikes it a third time. This one feels different, not louder or softer, but somehow closer. You feel it in your ribs, in the soft skin under your wrists, in your teeth. And with each fading ring, you notice how the space after the sound is just as rich as the sound itself. The apprentices take turns with the mallet, each striking the bell once. No rhythm, no sequence, no goal. Just a shared sound moving through each set of hands. When your turn comes, you grip the mallet lightly and tap the side of the bell. The note blooms just as it did for Hermes, but somehow it feels more personal now, as if the bell has kept something just for you. When everyone has played their part, Hermes replaces the mallet. We are addicted to reason, he says, to purpose, to cause and effect. But the bell does not ask why it is struck, it simply rings, and that is enough. You realize that for no reason doesn't mean without meaning. It means the meaning is allowed to exist without your permission, without your explanation. Hermes turns toward the far colonnade, the late afternoon shadows stretching across the courtyard like long fingers. Come, he says, we have one more sound to meet before the day turns. You glance back at the bell as you follow him. The sunlight catches its surface, and for a moment you're sure you can still hear it, not with your ears, but somewhere deeper, where sound and silence keep the same home. The bell's echo is still humming somewhere in your bones when Hermes leads the way to the refectory, a long, shaded hall open to the breeze from the courtyard. The air smells faintly of bread cooling on clay tiles and herbs crushed under the weight of a mortar. A low table runs the length of the room, ringed with cushions. No plates, no elaborate place settings, only woven baskets of bread and shallow clay bowls waiting to be filled. You notice the sun is still low. In the world you came from, this would barely be time for a mid-morning snack, but here, lunch comes early. Hermes calls it the meal before the shadows turn, a time when the body is still in rhythm with the day's first light. The apprentices bring in the food, bread, coarse and dark, bowls of lentils simmered in garlic and cumin, fresh figs, their skins splitting slightly in the heat, a pot of olive oil, green gold and cloudy, glinting in the light. There is no feast here, no excess, just enough. Hermes takes his place at the center of the table and waits, hands folded in his lap. Everyone follows his lead. A moment of silence stretches across the hall. You expect a blessing, but none comes. Instead, Hermes opens his eyes and looks down the length of the table. To eat without awareness, he says, is to waste the gift twice, once in the taking and again in the forgetting. Only then does the meal begin. Bread is torn, dipped into oil. The lentils are ladled into bowls, their steam curling into the warm air. The figs are passed hand to hand, each exchange marked by a small nod of thanks. There is no chatter, no clinking of utensils, just the muted sound of hands working, mouths chewing, breath moving. The lentils are simple but rich, their heat grounding you after the morning's stillness and chanting. The bread is dense, rough against your teeth, but softened by the oil's sharp, almost grassy flavour. The figs are honey-sweet, their juice sticky on your fingers. It is not a meal that asks for praise, but it gives you the quiet satisfaction of enough. When the baskets are empty and the bowls scraped clean, no one lingers. Hermes rises first, wiping his hands on a folded cloth. The body is satisfied, he says. Now keep it light until the sun falls. Hunger between meals will remind you that you are not just flesh. The apprentices begin clearing the table. The sound of bread baskets stacking and clay bowls clinking becomes the new rhythm of the hall. Hermes moves toward the courtyard, the folds of his robe brushing softly over the stone floor. You follow, your stomach warm and your mind strangely alert. Outside, the sunlight has shifted, brighter but sharper now, like the day itself is paying closer attention. The refectory is empty now, save for the faint lingering scent of bread and figs. The apprentices scatter to their midday tasks, but you linger, noticing something peculiar. No one tucks away a piece of bread for later. No figs are saved in cloth pouches. The last drop of olive oil is gone, and the bowls have been washed clean. The idea of just-in-case food doesn't seem to exist here. Hermes, passing through the courtyard, notices your gaze lingering on the now bare table. You are wondering why we do not eat again until tomorrow, he says, pausing in the shade of an olive tree. The answer is simple. The body always wants more than it needs. The mind is its accomplice. He sits on a low stone bench, gesturing for you to join him. Snacking, he says, is the whisper of impatience. You eat to fill a space before it is truly empty, and so you never learn what real emptiness feels like. You think about it. In the world beyond these walls, eating between meals is a comfort, a habit, even an unconscious reflex. Here, it is deliberately absent. The gap between meals is not a hardship, it's a discipline. Hermes picks up a fallen olive from the ground, rolling it between his fingers. If I eat this now, the taste will vanish in a moment. But if I wait, when the next meal comes, my hunger will greet it like a guest long expected. That welcome will be deeper than any casual indulgence. He sets the olive back on the earth. When the belly is always full, the mind becomes soft. But hunger, not starvation, but honest hunger, keeps the senses awake. It makes the first bite of bread a revelation instead of a routine. The apprentices pass through the courtyard carrying buckets of water and baskets of herbs, their steps purposeful, their faces calm. None seem distracted by the thought of food. Their hunger is waiting quietly in the background, not intruding on the work at hand. Hermes rises, smoothing the folds of his robe. "We do not forbid food between meals to punish the body," he says. "We do it to remind the soul that it has a say in the matter. If you can tell your hunger to wait, you will one day tell your anger, your fear, and your desire to wait as well." The breeze stirs the olive branches overhead, and a shaft of sunlight falls across the stone bench where you sit. You realize your own stomach is already thinking about the next meal, but now you feel less inclined to chase that thought. Hermes walks toward the cloister, glancing back once. "The gap is part of the feast," he says, and then he's gone, leaving you with the hum of the afternoon and the slow, quiet ticking of your own hunger. You've grown used to the temple's quiet rhythm. Incense at dawn, meditation in stillness, meals without indulgence. So when the apprentices begin hanging garlands of laurel and date palm across the courtyard walls, it feels almost startling, like someone whispered a secret into the day. It's a festival day, not the kind you know. There are no bright banners snapping in the wind, no tumbling acrobats, no cacophony of drums. Instead, the temple's celebration begins with stillness. The garlands sway in the breeze, their green scent mingling with the faint sweetness of pressed figs laid out on woven mats. The air hums with quiet anticipation, not noise. Hermes appears in the center of the courtyard wearing his robe freshly washed, the fabric almost glowing in the sun. He carries no scrolls, no staff. Instead, he holds a simple clay lamp, its wick unlit. "This is the day we turn our attention upward," he says. "Not to demand favor from the heavens, but to remember we are already part of them." The apprentices gather in a circle. A small brazier is brought forward, its coals glowing faintly. Hermes lowers the lamp toward the fire until the wick catches with a slow, steady flame. The light is pale in the afternoon sun, but it's not meant to impress. It's meant to travel. One by one, the apprentices take the flame from Hermes's lamp, lighting their own. No one hurries. The exchange feels deliberate, as if the act of passing light is the festival itself. Soon the circle glows faintly in the sunlight, each person holding a small living flame. There is no chanting yet, no speech, only the soft crackle of the wicks and the rustle of robes as the apprentices begin walking slowly around the courtyard. Their flames sway slightly in the breeze, but none falter. Hermes walks last, his lamp steady, his gaze moving not to the flames, but to the faces that carry them. The procession circles the courtyard 3 times before returning to the center. The flames are set on low shelves along the walls, the light pooling in the temple's shaded edges. Only now does Hermes speak again. "A festival without noise," he says, "is not a lesser joy. It is a joy that doesn't need to prove itself. In stillness, it burns brighter." The apprentices bow their heads, and the courtyard settles into a deeper calm. The garlands sway, the figs wait on their mats. Somewhere outside the walls, the city roars with its own celebrations, but none of that crosses the temple threshold. You stand in the soft glow of the lamps, realizing you've never seen a celebration so quiet and yet so full. Hermes looks toward the setting sun. "The day honors itself," he says simply. And as the light fades, you begin to understand. Here, the fire is not in the sky. It is in your hands. The festival lamps are still burning when Hermes moves quietly through the courtyard, pausing beside each apprentice. He carries no staff, no scroll, only a small pouch of dried herbs and a sprig of laurel. His steps are slow, his gaze steady. Without asking, he stops before one of the younger students, pinches a few herbs between his fingers, and scatters them lightly over the crown of the boy's head. The boy closes his eyes, breathing in the faint aroma of rosemary and myrrh. Hermes whispers something too soft to hear, then moves on. You realize this is his way of giving blessings. Not announced, not scheduled. No one asks for them. They simply arrive when he decides they should. When he stands before you, he doesn't speak right away. He looks at you in a way that makes you feel like you've been caught between two mirrors, seen from the outside and the inside all at once. Then he pinches the herbs, scattering them gently so that a few cling to your hair, a few drift to the ground. The scent rises in a green, woody cloud, and you breathe it in without meaning to. He places the laurel sprig lightly against your shoulder. To walk with the laurel, he says, is to remember victory is not conquest, but alignment. He lets the words sit between you for a heartbeat, then moves on. Around the courtyard, each apprentice receives their own quiet moment. Some only a few words, some a longer murmur. No two blessings are the same. Hermes adjusts them as if tuning a stringed instrument, each touch precise, each word measured. There is no visible change in anyone, no glow, no sudden rush of ecstasy, but you can feel the air shift, like the temperature in the room has been gently corrected. It's subtle, the way a small candle can change the whole scent of a space. When Hermes finishes his round, he stands in the center of the courtyard. Blessings are not coins to be counted, he says. They are not given for merit, nor withheld for lack of it. A blessing is the moment the world remembers you. The lamps flicker in the evening air. Somewhere beyond the walls, the noise of the city festival swells. Inside, the quiet deepens. The apprentices go back to their tasks, folding robes, preparing tea, clearing the last of the garlands, but each moves with a trace of something softer, steadier. You brush a stray rosemary leaf from your sleeve, its scent clinging to your fingertips. You didn't ask for it, you don't entirely understand it, but it feels like something you'll be carrying for a long time. Hermes steps toward the cloister, the lamplight catching his profile. Keep it, or let it go, he says without looking back. The blessing works either way. The garlands still sway faintly in the evening breeze when you notice the gatekeeper unlatch the great cedar doors. A small group stands outside. Travellers, their cloaks dusty from the road, sandals worn to the thread. They carry no gifts, no formal letters of introduction. Still, the gatekeeper opens the doors wide and motions them in. The apprentices pause their work to greet them, each bowing slightly. No one asks who they are or why they've come. Instead, they're given water first, then a basin to wash their hands and faces. The guests are led to a shaded corner of the courtyard where fresh mats have been laid out. A pot of herbal tea appears, steaming and fragrant. Hermes watches from the colonnade, his eyes moving slowly from guest to guest. He does not step forward to welcome them, not yet. The first kindness, he says to you quietly, is to make them feel they have arrived. Words can wait. The guests sip their tea in silence, their shoulders loosening under the temple's quiet air. A pair of apprentices bring bread and figs, setting them down with no ceremony. Only when the travellers have eaten does Hermes approach. His welcome is simple. You are here. Be here. No titles, no elaborate courtesies. Just that. And somehow, it's enough. You watch how the apprentices care for the visitors, mending a frayed cloak, refilling a cup without asking, showing them where they may rest. The guests ask nothing, yet nothing they need goes unnoticed. It's a kind of attentiveness that isn't loud about itself, the way a well-built wall stands without anyone needing to point at it. Later, Hermes explains, hospitality is not about displaying your generosity, it is about removing the guest's sense of being a stranger. A gift given to impress is a debt. A gift given to remove distance is a bridge. He tells you that the temple keeps no ledger of favours, no memory of how much bread was shared or how much water poured. What is given is considered gone, not a loan, not a bargain, just gone, like incense smoke after a prayer. The guests retire early. led to simple rooms where woven mats and folded blankets wait. No one checks on them, yet you know they will wake to find warm water and a place at the table. The temple runs on the quiet confidence that no one inside its walls will go unnoticed. Hermes glances toward the darkening sky. "A guest is not a pause in your work," he says. "They are part of it." As the courtyard settles, you notice the gates remain unlocked. In a city where doors are bolted at dusk, here they stand open to the night air. It feels less like an invitation and more like a promise that whoever comes will not be turned away. Night falls without haste, the last streaks of amber fading from the western sky. By the time the moon climbs above the city walls, the courtyard is bathed in silver light so bright it seems to erase the boundary between shadow and stone. The apprentices move quietly, placing oil lamps along the perimeter, their flames small compared to the great lantern of the moon overhead. Hermes stands in the center, his robe catching the moonlight, his staff tipped with 2 silver serpents that glint faintly. He raises his eyes toward the sky for a long moment before speaking. The sun teaches by revealing. The moon teaches by reflecting. Tonight we listen to the second voice. The circle forms. Apprentices, guests, even you, all seated cross-legged in the cool air. A low bowl of water is brought into the center. The moon's reflection wavers on its surface, a liquid echo of the night sky. Hermes begins to chant, a slow, deep rhythm that seems to rise not from his throat but from somewhere older. The chant is wordless at first, just sound shaping air. Gradually, the apprentices join in, their voices layering until the courtyard hums like a single body breathing. The bowl of water trembles faintly with each vibration. Hermes takes a sprig of laurel, dips it into the water, and sprinkles a few drops onto the stones. "This is the night's blessing," he says, "not given by me, but by the turning of the sky." He offers the bowl to the first apprentice, who gazes into it, then passes it on. When it reaches you, the moon's reflection ripples with each breath you take. You stare until the ripples smooth and the pale disk stares back, calm and whole. As the bowl completes the circle, Hermes speaks again. "The moon reminds us we are not the source of our own light. What we shine is what we have received." His voice is soft, but the words settle heavily in the mind. The chant resumes, slower now, fading into silence like a tide drawing back. The oil lamps flicker, the night air cooling as if the moon itself had exhaled. No one moves to end the gathering. The silence feels as deliberate as the chant that came before it. Finally, Hermes steps to the edge of the circle, resting his staff lightly on the stones. "The ceremony is over," he says, "but the moon will continue without us. Look up when you leave and remember who is watching." The group disperses quietly. The guests return to their rooms, apprentices to their duties. You linger in the courtyard a moment longer, the silver light painting your hands. When you finally turn to go, the moon follows you in every shadow you cast, as if unwilling to let you walk away alone. The moon ceremony leaves the courtyard hushed, its silver light draped over the temple like a second roof. No one speaks as the apprentices begin the night's quiet work. In the dim glow of oil lamps, the day's tools are put away, mats rolled and stacked, lantern wicks trimmed for tomorrow. The festival garlands, now slightly wilted, are taken down and set aside for compost. You are handed a simple broom, again, but this time the sweeping is softer, slower. The morning's work had been about clearing, tonight's is about calming. The bristles whisper across the stone like a lullaby. You notice how the sweepers move in slow arcs, their bodies turning with the motion, robes swaying in rhythm. In the far corner, someone polishes the copper water basin until it mirrors the flicker of the lamps. Another apprentice kneels to fold the festival mats, pressing each crease into place with careful hands. Even the smallest movements are deliberate, as if each task is an act of closing a door without making a sound. Hermes moves among the workers without directing them. He does not check their progress or assign duties. He simply joins in, gathering stray fig leaves from under the olive trees, his robe brushing the stone like part of the wind. The silence is not enforced. It is simply shared. Everyone knows this is not the time for conversation. Your own task finishes quickly, yet you hesitate to stop. The quiet work has a rhythm that's almost magnetic. The sound of the broom blends with the faint clink of folded lamps being set in their niches, the soft sigh of mats being stacked. The whole temple seems to breathe together, each person part of the same slow exhale. Hermes pauses by the gate, placing one hand lightly on the wood. "Evening work," he says quietly, "is not for the temple's sake. It is for the mind. When you put away what has been used, you put away what you no longer need to carry." He lets his hand rest there a moment before moving on. By the time the last mat is folded and the final broom is leaned against the wall, the temple looks less like a place that has been tidied and more like a place that has been allowed to sleep. The moonlight slides across the stones unbroken. The air smells faintly of olive leaves and clean wood. Hermes extinguishes the last lamp in the courtyard. The darkness does not feel empty. It feels whole, like a completed thought. You step back into the moonlight, feeling lighter, as though the day has finally folded itself away inside you. And in that moment, you understand. Sometimes the silence after work is the real work. The courtyard is dim now, the moon silvering the edges of the roof tiles. The air carries the scent of cooling stone and the faint sweetness of the laurel garlands taken down earlier. Hermes gestures for the apprentices to follow him into the meditation hall. No one speaks. Even the sound of sandals on stone feels softened. Inside, the hall is lit only by a single oil lamp, its flame swaying in the still air. Cushions have been arranged in a wide circle. Hermes takes his seat at the center, folding himself into stillness like a door closing without a sound. You and the others sink onto your cushions, settling into the cool hush. "This is not the morning's sitting," Hermes says, his voice low and measured. "This is not the afternoon's either. This one belongs to the night." You close your eyes. At first, the darkness is the same as always, a shifting backdrop of shapes and drifting thoughts. But the day's long rhythm has done its work. The chatter in your mind has fewer places to hide now. The breath comes easier, slower, each inhale and exhale finding its own steady beat. Hermes speaks again, barely above a whisper. "The night does not ask you to reach for anything. It asks you to rest in what you already are." The room sinks deeper into stillness. Even the occasional cough or shifting of fabric seems part of it. Your thoughts, usually so quick to dart away, settle like leaves drifting to the bottom of a pond. The silence begins to feel alive, stretching out like a calm sea under a moonlit sky. A strange awareness rises, of the others in the circle, of their breathing aligning with yours, of the single lamp holding its flame as if guarding the room. You realize the meditation is no longer just yours. It is shared, a net of stillness in which you all rest together. You lose track of time. It could be minutes, it could be hours. Then, without warning, Hermes opens his eyes. The shift is subtle but unmistakable, like the first breeze before dawn. He looks around the circle slowly. "We end not because we are finished," he says, "but because the night will carry the rest for us." The apprentices bow their heads. The lamp's flame dances once, twice, as if in agreement. One by one, you unfold from the cushion, legs tingling from stillness, mind light but anchored. Outside, the moon has moved further west, and the shadows have changed their shape. You step into the cool air, feeling as though the day's final knot has been untied. And in that loosened space, you understand. The last meditation is not for finding the day's meaning. It is for letting the day go. The night air is cool when Hermes leads the apprentices from the meditation hall to the scriptorium. The room smells faintly of ink, lamp oil, and old papyrus, a fragrance that feels like the memory of knowledge itself. Low shelves are lined with scrolls wrapped in linen, each one tied with a strip of dyed thread marking its subject. At the centre of the room, low tables are set in a circle. Lamps burn steadily, their flames barely swaying. An apprentice unrolls a long scroll, the ink so fine it seems etched into the fibres. It's a sutra, not a small fragment or a brief aphorism, but an unbroken stream of thought that could take hours to read. Hermes takes his seat. The body has been stilled, he says, but the mind must also be sharpened. The sutra is the whetstone. The reading begins. Hermes' voice is unhurried but precise, each syllable placed like a stone in a careful mosaic. The apprentices follow silently, their eyes tracing the characters as they emerge. You do the same, though the symbols are not entirely familiar. At first, it feels like trying to listen to a river in a language you've never learned. But as the minutes stretch, something changes. The repetition of certain words, the rhythm of the phrasing, the subtle shifts in tone, they begin to work on you. You start to sense the shape of the meaning, even if you can't yet hold all its details. Hermes pauses to explain a phrase, not in plain speech, but in a way that leaves you hanging between the original and the explanation, as though both are necessary to grasp the thought. You notice that the apprentices never interrupt, even when the meaning is unclear. They trust the sutra to unfold in its own time. The reading goes on. Your eyes tire, but your mind feels strangely alert. The scroll is long, the sentence is winding, but the rhythm has pulled you into something steady. You lose track of the hour. The world beyond the scriptorium feels far away. Finally, Hermes reaches the last lines. He rolls the scroll slowly, smoothing the linen strip back into place. A sutra, he says, is not for finishing. It is for carrying. When you think you've read it, it begins to read you. The lamps burn low. The apprentices return the scroll to its shelf with the care of returning a sleeping child to bed. You step outside into the courtyard. The moon has shifted again, now leaning toward the horizon. The air is colder, and the night feels deeper, thicker. The words of the sutra are still in your head, not as something you've learned, but as something you've agreed to keep. And as you walk toward your quarters, you realize the study did not end when the scroll closed. It will go on as long as you let it. The scriptorium is dark now, the scrolls resting in their linen wrappings like sleeping animals. You'd think, after hours of study, the apprentices would be eager to copy what they've read, to trap the words safely on parchment so they won't slip away by morning. But here, no one reaches for pen or ink. No wax tablets are brought out. No one writes. Hermes notices your surprise. He walks slowly to the center of the courtyard, the moonlight outlining the folds of his robe. You think the way to keep wisdom, he says, is to cage it on the page. But a bird in a cage is not the same as a bird in flight. The apprentices gather around him. When you write too soon, he continues, you stop listening. You cling to the shadow of the teaching rather than the teaching itself. One of the older students speaks. But if we do not write, won't we forget? Hermes smiles faintly. If you forget, it means you never learned. What is carried only in ink can be burned, stolen, or lost. What is carried in the living mind walks with you everywhere. He tells a story of a desert traveller who carried a map inked on fragile parchment. When a storm came, the map dissolved in the rain. But the traveller who had memorized the landmarks and the paths, that one found the way even in darkness. Here, in the house of Hermes, memory is a discipline. After a teaching, the apprentices repeat it to one another in the quiet of the evening, not word for word, but in the shape it left in their minds. The meaning is strengthened each time it is passed along, not weakened like a copy of a copy. Hermes kneels beside a shallow basin filled with water. Look, he says, this is the mind when you listen. He taps the surface lightly, sending ripples across it. Every word is a wave. If you are truly still, you will feel it long after it has passed. But if you rush to net it, you catch only fragments, and the water is never calm enough to show you the whole. You think of the sutra from earlier. You can't recite it perfectly, but parts of it are lodged in you like seeds. You carry its shape, its weight, its breath. You realize you don't need every word to keep it alive. Hermes stands, his shadow stretching long across the courtyard. Do not fear forgetting, he says. Fear not living with what you have learned. The apprentices bow slightly, the night air cool on their faces. Somewhere a fig drops from the tree with a soft thud, the sound of something ripened enough to keep without writing. And you understand, here, memory isn't a record, it's a living companion. The night has grown heavy, the moon drifting westward as the oil lamps burn low in their niches. The temple is quiet, but not asleep. Somewhere in the distance, a lone cricket chirps. Then you hear it, a deep, measured sound rolling through the courtyard like a slow heartbeat. The bell. It isn't the same bell from earlier in the day. This one is larger, darker in tone, its voice carrying through the corridors like a tide that refuses to be hurried. An apprentice stands beside it, mallet in hand, waiting for the exact moment between each strike. The pauses feel as important as the sound itself. Hermes appears from the shadows, his face softened by the lamplight. He walks to the bell and rests his hand on its cool bronze curve. This, he says, is the bell that closes the day. It speaks to the body, the mind, and the spirit all at once. When it sounds, nothing more is required of you. The apprentices gather, some still in work robes, others wrapped in the lighter cloaks they use for sleep. No one rushes. The bell will not allow it. Each strike seems to stretch the night wider, as though giving everyone permission to breathe in time with its rhythm. Hermes gestures for you to stand closer. Morning bells are for rising, he says quietly. They stir the body and call the mind to readiness, but the evening bell, it is not a summons, it is a release. The apprentice strikes again. The note swells, hangs in the cool air, then thins to nothing. Your chest loosens with it. You feel the weight of the day, the walking, the meditations, the sutra study, even the silence, slide off your shoulders without needing to be pushed. No one applauds the bell, no one thanks it, no one speaks when it fades. That is its gift. It asks for nothing in return. Hermes steps back and lets the apprentice finish the final 3 strikes. Each one lands deeper, more certain, as if marking not just the end of the day, but a closing within the mind itself. When the last tone fades, Hermes looks over the small gathering. You may carry the day with you if you wish, he says, but you may also leave it here. The bell will keep it until you return. The apprentices bow their heads. The courtyard settles into stillness, as though the air itself has exhaled. You follow Hermes toward the inner quarters, your steps slow, the echo of the bell still pulsing faintly somewhere inside you, and you know tomorrow will begin again soon enough. But tonight, the day belongs to the silence that follows the sound. The courtyard has gone still. The moon's light pools in the open spaces, spilling gently over the stone floor like cool water. The apprentices begin drifting toward their sleeping quarters, narrow rooms with reed mats rolled neatly along the walls. You follow, expecting to find the kind of bedding that will ease your tired limbs after a day of walking, sitting, chanting, sweeping, and listening. You find no such thing. There are no cushioned mattresses here, no blankets thick enough to swallow you whole. The mats are woven from palm reeds, their surface smooth in some places and scratchy in others. At the head of each mat is nothing, no pillow, just more mat. You glance toward an older apprentice who catches your expression and smiles faintly. The neck holds the mind, he says. Best not to let it sink. Hermes appears in the doorway, his robe catching the lamplight as he steps inside. He seems unsurprised by your curiosity. A pillow, he says, is a small luxury with a hidden cost. It lifts the head above the heart all night. In the body, as in the mind, balance matters even while you sleep. The apprentices move quietly, unrolling their mats and folding light linen cloths to cover themselves. The air smells faintly of laurel and the dried rushes that form the floor. There is no talking now. The night belongs to stillness. You settle onto your mat. The floor beneath feels harder than you expected, but not unkind. There is a certain grounding in its firmness, as if it's reminding you that you belong to the earth, not to the clouds. The absence of a pillow at first feels wrong. Your head searches for the familiar soft rise, but finds only level ground. Hermes kneels beside you. "Tonight you will learn two things," he says softly. "The first is that the body will always ask for what it's used to, not for what it needs. The second is that stillness is not found by cushioning yourself from life, but by lying openly in its shape. You breathe in the cool air, the faint rustle of linen and reeds. Slowly, your body adjusts. The muscles in your neck lengthen. Your jaw unclenches. You begin to feel the evenness, the head in line with the spine, the breath moving without obstruction. Somewhere nearby, Hermes extinguishes the last lamp. Darkness folds itself over the room, deep and whole. You hear the quiet shifting of bodies as the apprentices settle. Outside, the wind brushes against the olive trees, their leaves whispering to each other. Your mind, which had been ready to replay the day's lessons, finds less and less to cling to. The absence of the pillow becomes less noticeable. What remains is the simplicity of being here, flat against the mat, aligned with the floor, nothing elevated, nothing pressed down. You feel strangely as though the earth itself is supporting not just your body, but your thoughts. The hardness beneath you isn't discomfort now, it's clarity. Hermes' voice drifts from the darkness. When you sleep without a pillow, you dream closer to the ground, and in the morning you rise already standing on it. The room is silent again. The olive branches sway outside. Somewhere in the night, the city breathes its own rhythm, but here the temple has surrendered to the quiet. You close your eyes, not sinking into sleep so much as laying yourself gently into it. The mat beneath you does not yield. The night accepts you without ceremony, and as you drift, you understand. Comfort isn't always soft. Sometimes it's simply being held level with the world. The morning bell comes early, but you wake before it. The room is still dim, the scent of laurel faint in the cool air. The temple is not yet moving, yet you find yourself restless. The day's structure will unfold exactly as it did yesterday, and likely as it will tomorrow. No surprise, no sudden drama, just the same rhythm over and over, and for the first time since arriving here you feel it. Boredom. It creeps in quietly, a slow fog filling the space between thoughts. You have swept floors before. You have sat in meditation before. You have heard Hermes speak about the all before. There is a voice in your head whispering, "I already know this." Hermes seems to sense it before you say a word. As the apprentices gather in the courtyard for morning tasks, he walks past you without stopping, only saying, "You are ready for the most difficult lesson." You follow him to a shaded bench near the herb garden. He sits and folds his hands. "The young mind," he says, "believes that learning is a parade of new things. The mature mind learns that wisdom hides in what you have already done 100 times. You shift uncomfortably. But what if I'm bored?" Hermes doesn't flinch at the word. Boredom is the mind refusing to enter the moment because it believes it deserves more. It is pride disguised as weariness. He plucks a single olive leaf from a branch overhead and turns it slowly in his fingers. When you are bored, you are not looking at what is in front of you. You are looking for a way out of it. And so you miss the depth that repetition offers. The floor you sweep today is not the floor you swept yesterday. The breath you take now is not the breath you took this morning, and the self who sees these things will not be the same self tomorrow. You think back to the wall you stared at days ago, how plain it seemed at first, how much it revealed when you stopped demanding something from it. Hermes smiles faintly. The shallow student demands variety. The deeper student learns to stay when the mind says leave. This is why the temple repeats itself, so you will learn to see more in less. The rest of the morning unfolds as expected, sweeping, preparing tea, meditation. But you begin to notice the small variations, how the broom's bristles make a different sound on the shaded stones than in the sunlit courtyard, how the tea smells slightly stronger today because the apprentice crushed the leaves more firmly, how your own breath in meditation pauses for a fraction of a second longer than yesterday. By midday, the fog of boredom has thinned. You understand now that it was not the temple that lacked something, it was you refusing to look closely enough. As the sun begins to climb, Hermes passes you in the garden. He doesn't stop, but says over his shoulder, "The cure for boredom is not excitement, it is attention." The words settle over you like a blanket, not heavy, but grounding. You look at the olive tree again. Same tree, same leaves. But somehow, you see more in it than you did an hour ago. Boredom, you realize, was never the emptiness of the moment. It was the emptiness you brought to it. And now, the day feels new, without anything in it having changed. The afternoon sun slants across the courtyard, warm but not yet heavy. Hermes leads the apprentices into the meditation hall, where the air smells faintly of incense burned earlier in the day. The cushions are already arranged in a loose circle. You sit, folding your legs, ready for another session of stillness. Hermes stands at the center. Today, he says, you will not try to focus. You will only watch where the mind goes. At first, it feels too easy. You close your eyes and wait. Immediately, the thoughts begin their parade. An image of the fig bread from yesterday's meal, the sound of a bell from somewhere in the city, a sudden itch on your left shoulder. You let them pass, but they keep coming, like a stream of people wandering through an open gate. You remember Hermes' instruction: don't chase them, don't push them away, just watch. So you do. You watch as your mind decides it wants to replay an old conversation from years ago, then shifts to wondering how long until the next meal, then jumps, without warning, to a half-forgotten dream from childhood. It's chaotic, almost comical. You realize that without your usual effort to hold it still, the mind is like a dog off its leash, running in every direction at once. Hermes' voice cuts softly through the room. Do you see how the mind believes it is the master, and how quickly it shows its nature when you let it roam? You breathe in, breathing with the swirl of thought instead of against it. At some point, you begin to see a pattern. Certain thoughts come back again and again, like restless birds returning to the same branch. Others flicker in and out so fast you barely have time to register them. Some carry a faint emotional weight, a tug in the chest, a tightening in the throat. Hermes speaks again. The mind's wandering is not the problem. Your ignorance of its wandering is. See it clearly, and it loses its power to lead you without your knowing. The minutes pass, or maybe hours. You lose track. The practice shifts from passively watching to something sharper, as though you're tracking an animal's footprints through fresh snow. You see the first stirrings of a thought before it fully arrives, the way a shadow precedes the body that casts it. It's oddly freeing. Without trying to stop your mind, you begin to notice that it slows on its own. The more you see it, the less it needs to leap from one distraction to another. Eventually, Hermes says, now you understand why focus cannot be forced. To see the wandering is already to begin the returning. You open your eyes. The light in the room has shifted, softer now, the sun lowering beyond the windows. The apprentices rise slowly, as if reluctant to disturb the strange, watchful quiet that has filled the space. Outside, the world moves on. A merchant calling to customers beyond the temple walls. The cry of a gull passing overhead. The faint clink of a water jar set down in the kitchen. But now you can see that your mind is not simply being pulled by these sounds. It is watching them too. Hermes walks past you toward the courtyard. The mind will wander all your life, he says, but once you can follow it without being carried away, you will never be lost. You step out into the fading light, carrying that sentence the way you might carry a lantern into the night. After a day of silent work, breathing practice, and mind-watching, you expect the next meditation to be calmer. Instead, it becomes peculiar. You sit in the meditation hall, the oil lamps casting long shadows across the stone floor. The air is cool, faintly touched by the smell of rosemary from the herb garden. You close your eyes, find your breath, and wait for the familiar rhythm of stillness to arrive. And that's when it happens. The thoughts begin, but not the usual ones. First, you picture a pair of sandals you haven't worn in years, wondering where they went. Then, without reason, your mind jumps to the image of a cat from your childhood staring at you from under a kitchen table. That memory dissolves into an imagined scene of you balancing a jug of water on your head, something you have never once done in your life. You try not to laugh. Hermes has told you before, the mind, when it quiets from everyday chatter, sometimes reveals its stranger attic rooms. These are the thoughts that usually drift unnoticed under the surface, odd fragments stitched together from memory, imagination, and the subconscious trying to amuse itself. Hermes' voice floats into the space. When the mind no longer knows what it should think about, it shows you what it has been hiding. You keep sitting. The thoughts keep arriving, each more curious than the last. You see the shape of a fish turning into a clay lamp. You remember a word in a language you don't speak. You imagine walking backward through the temple with your eyes closed. At first it feels random, but then you notice how some of these strange images carry a feeling, an echo from somewhere in your life. The sandals remind you of journeys. The cat reminds you of comfort and safety. The lampfish reminds you of how quickly things can change from one form to another. Hermes once told you that the strange mind is not the foolish mind. It is simply the deeper mind speaking in pictures instead of sentences. He calls these the seeds of dreams, and warns that they often hold more truth than the sensible thoughts you cling to. You keep watching, not trying to stop anything. Eventually, the pace of oddities slows, and the mind seems to grow tired of performing. A calm opens up, different from ordinary stillness, but fuller somehow. It's as if your thoughts have stretched their legs and can now sit down with you. Hermes says quietly, "The strange things you think about are not mistakes. They are the roots showing themselves. Look long enough, and you may see the whole tree." When the session ends, the apprentices rise without speaking. You step outside into the cool night air, the moon hanging low over the courtyard, and you find yourself smiling. Not because you've uncovered some great revelation, but because you've seen a side of your own mind you rarely meet. Hermes passes by, glancing at you briefly. "Keep those strange ones," he says. "They are the thoughts that lead you where logic cannot." You stand for a while under the moon, feeling like you've been given a handful of small, oddly shaped keys. You have no idea what doors they open, but you know you'll try them all. The morning sun is warm but not yet fierce as you sit with the apprentices in the shaded colonnade. The air hums faintly with the sound of the city beyond the temple walls. Hermes stands before you, hands folded behind his back, his gaze as calm as if it had been resting on the same horizon for 1,000 years. "This," he says, "is the lesson you will resist the most, that there is no such thing as instant enlightenment." He lets the words hang, watching for the flicker of disappointment they inevitably stir. You feel it yourself, that small, almost childish wish that one great meditation, one perfect insight, will be enough to snap the world into place like a completed puzzle. Hermes begins to pace slowly along the colonnade. You have been told that a single flash of insight will burn away the fog forever. That is a comforting story, but it is a child's version of the truth. Enlightenment is not lightning, it is sunrise. The apprentices listen, motionless. Hermes stops by a column, resting a hand against its cool stone. Lightning dazzles and disappears. Sunrise changes the whole world without rushing. Which would you rather depend on? You remember moments in your life when you felt certain you'd seen something, a truth, a meaning, a sudden clarity, and yet days later it slipped from your grasp, leaving only a faint memory. You thought it was your fault for losing it. Now, Hermes is telling you it was never meant to last in that form. A moment of insight, he says, is a seed, but a seed will rot if it is not planted, watered, and given time. Instant enlightenment, he gestures lightly with one hand, is the seed without the soil. An apprentice asks, "But don't some masters say they awakened all at once?" Hermes smiles faintly. "Even if they did, the awakening was only the door. They still had to walk through it, one step at a time. You can open a door in an instant. You cannot cross a desert that way. The lesson seeps in slowly. You realize that your desire for instant enlightenment is really a desire to avoid the long road, the repetition, the humility, the daily practice. It is a wish to skip ahead to the end without living the middle. Hermes continues, the mind is impatient. It would rather worship the moment of awakening than commit to the work it demands afterward. But the self that wakes must then learn to live awake. That is the true task, and it is not instant. The colonnade falls silent. You can feel the weight of his words settle into the air, heavy but strangely freeing. There is no pressure to seize the lightning or to trap it. There is only the work of tending the sunrise every day until it fills the sky. Hermes turns to go, then pauses. If you think enlightenment is a moment, he says, you will keep chasing moments. But if you know it is a way, you will begin to walk it and never have to chase it again. The apprentices bow their heads slightly. The city's noise drifts faintly through the walls, indifferent to your revelation. You step into the sunlight of the courtyard, no longer expecting lightning to strike. Instead, you look for the slow brightening at the edges, and you find it waiting there, patient as the dawn. The day is leaning toward its close. The sunlight is softer now, bending into the courtyard in long amber threads. The apprentices are scattered about the temple, each absorbed in a small task, trimming the lamp wicks for evening, polishing the brass basin, folding clean robes. None of it looks dramatic, but there is a strange warmth in the air, not from the sun, but from the way everyone moves. You realize it's not happiness you're sensing, it's something quieter. Hermes is sitting beneath the olive tree, a scroll resting in his lap but unopened. He watches the courtyard the way someone might watch a familiar river, content to let it move without interruption. You approach, expecting him to begin a new lesson. He does not. Instead, he gestures to the space beside him. For a while, you both sit in silence. You notice the light pooling on the stone floor, the way the breeze nudges the olive leaves so their silver undersides flash briefly before settling again. The scent of rosemary drifts in from the garden. Hermes finally speaks, his voice so even it almost blends with the quiet. The world trains you to chase joy loudly, to hunt it, to claim it, to display it. But the deepest joy comes like a cat. It appears when you are not calling it, stays when you do not try to hold it. You let the words sink in. They match the feeling you've had all afternoon, the sense of being quietly full without knowing when it began. This joy, Hermes continues, is not the opposite of sorrow. It is what remains steady beneath both. When you feel it, you are not elated. You are not even excited. You are simply here. He tells you of travelers who spend their lives moving from city to city, market to market, searching for a joy they think is hidden somewhere out there. But when they stop for breath, they sometimes find it was waiting in them the whole time. You think back to your own days outside the temple, how joy always seemed tied to something happening, a success, a gift, a moment of beauty that burst in like unexpected music. It never occurred to you that joy could be still, unannounced, and unshakable. Hermes closes his eyes briefly, breathing in the air as if to prove his point. Quiet joy is the companion you forget you have until you stop walking fast enough for it to catch up. The apprentices begin gathering in the courtyard for the evening chores, their movements unhurried. Someone laughs softly at a private joke. A small clay cup of tea is set beside you without a word. Even this, the simple act of someone thinking to bring it, feels like part of the same thread running through the afternoon. You sip the tea. It's neither sweet nor bitter, just warm. You can't imagine wanting anything more from it. Hermes rises, brushing the dust from his robe. Loud joy will make you run, he says. Quiet joy will teach you how to stay. As he walks toward the colonnade, you remain beneath the olive tree, holding the cup in both hands. The light is almost gone now, but the courtyard feels brighter than it did an hour ago. And you understand, joy doesn't always arrive with a shout. Sometimes it simply sits beside you until you notice you've been smiling for a while. The temple sleeps. The courtyard lies under a pale wash of moonlight, the olive leaves barely moving in the still air. The low murmur of the city beyond the walls has faded into the distance, replaced by the soft rhythm of crickets in the garden. The apprentices have retired to their reed mats, their breathing slow, their bodies curled in the simplicity of rest. Even the oil lamps have been trimmed to faint embers, the night allowed to stand almost entirely on its own. And yet, Hermes is awake. He sits near the gate, robe drawn loosely around him, his gaze fixed not on the moon or the shadows, but on the empty space between. He doesn't speak when you approach, and for a moment you simply stand there, unsure whether to disturb the quiet. Then, without turning, he says, "The day is not over when the sun sets. It ends when the mind agrees to let it go." You sit beside him. The ground is cool. The air smells faintly of dried herbs from the apothecary room. Hermes folds his hands in his lap, eyes half-lidded. "You think tomorrow will be different," he says. "It will not, and that is its perfection." He tells you that each day in the temple is a mirror, the same frame, the same surface, but what you see in it changes depending on the eyes you bring. The walking, the sweeping, the chanting, the long silences, they are not meant to surprise you. They are meant to show you that the surprise is always you. Every morning, Hermes continues, is a waking into the same world. But you are never exactly the same as the one who slept. That is why we rise, even when the day is familiar. You think of the bell at dawn, the incense curling into the cool air, the taste of bread dipped in oil, the feel of the broom in your hand, the sound of sandals across stone. The repetition you once thought might dull you has instead sharpened you, like a blade honed not in haste but in patient, steady strokes. Hermes leans back against the wall. "One day," he says, "you will leave this place. You will walk into streets without bells, into mornings without incense, into nights without the sound of sandals in the courtyard, and you will think the teaching is far behind you, but it will not be." He turns toward you then, his eyes bright even in the low light. You will wake up again and again, in every place, in every life, in every moment you notice that you are here. That is all we have tried to teach you. The moon slips behind a thin cloud, and for a heartbeat the courtyard darkens. When the light returns, Hermes is standing, his robe whispering softly against the stones. He rests a hand on your shoulder, light enough to be a passing breeze, steady enough to be felt long after it lifts. "Go and sleep," he says. "Tomorrow you will wake, and the work will be waiting, as it always is." You return to your mat. The night folds around you like a familiar cloak. You close your eyes, not sinking into sleep, but easing into it, the way you step into a pool you know well. And when the morning bell comes, whether here or years from now, or in a place that has never known Hermes' name, you will rise, you will breathe, you will sweep, you will see, and you will understand. Every day is the first day, and every day you wake again.